Langrisser is an older series when it comes down to Japanese tactical role-playing games, and hasn't really had too much exposure in the West. The first game in the series did get a Western release for the Sega Genesis called Warsong in 1991. However, there were a number of changes to the game in order to appeal to the Western audience at the time, and since then the West hasn't really heard much about Langrisser until we got Langrisser Reincarnation Tensei in 2015-2016 for the Nintendo 3DS, which I covered a few years back. I was pretty surprised when I heard that Langrisser I and II were getting remade, and with the mobile game, I'm starting to hope that there will be interest in the series, as we've really only had fan translations of the second and fourth games in the series, as well as a revision of the first game which restored its original names and artwork. This isn't the first time Langrisser and Langrisser II have been remade either. Langrisser II got a Super Nintendo remake as Der Langrisser, which added in the series staple of picking a faction and fighting alongside them, as well as revising the story and difficulty. Langrisser and Der Langrisser both got ported to the PlayStation, and the games received another update to the Sega Saturn as Langrisser Dramatic Edition. As well as the upgraded graphics, Der Langrisser's story was expanded on further, and this version of the game is what this remake's Langrisser II is based on. For the remake, the game had received new art by Ryo Nagi of Art Tanalico fame, though for people who prefer the original art by Satoshi Urashihara, such as myself, it is available to switch to. The game also gives you the choice of using the updated modern looking maps or the classic retro maps, as well as modern renditions of the music or the 1991 to 1994 versions. For transparency, a copy of the game was provided to me courtesy of the publisher. Langrisser and Langrisser II are both set in the continent of Alsalia, with the events of Langrisser II taking place many years after Langrisser. In the first game you play as Prince Ledin, who is forced to escape his home in Baldea Castle, leaving his father and his retainers behind to defend it against the invading Dalsis Empire. Ledin manages to escape to the county of Seraph, where he rebuilds his forces in order to take his home back and take the battle to the Empire to restore peace, unaware of the dark forces at play. Langrisser II has you playing as Elwyn, a wandering warrior who witnesses an attack on the village he's staying at, and an attempted abduction of Liana, the village's priestess, as well as the childhood friend of Elwyn's mage companion Hain. After rescuing Liana from the Blue Dragon Cavalry led by Leon on behalf of the Rhaegar Empire, Elwyn and his allies must gather their forces to fight back. As similar as the stories sound to each other, depending on your actions, especially in the second game, the outcome can be very different. But is the game any good? Find out in The Good. I've generally liked the gameplay of Langrisser. Something about having your commanders lead soldiers to fight the enemy really makes it stand out. And while rival Fire Emblem recently added in battalions with its latest entry to give the feeling of having many soldiers fighting each other, Langrisser has had this as a feature since its original release. Each of your commanders can hire mercenaries who fight alongside them. These mercenaries, as well as your commanders, used to only have 10 HP, with the amount of damage based on how strong the units are, as well as the game's weapons triangle. Much like Fire Emblem, Langrisser has its own weapons triangle, though it works a little differently. Swords beat lancers, lancers beat cavalry, and cavalry beat swords. There are also priests and wizards who are also effective against monsters and demons depending on the spells they cast, as well as bowmen to take out those pesky flying units. In the remake, characters and soldiers now have more than 10 HP, but the outcome of battles still rely on how strong the units are and how effective they are against their opponents. Your mercenaries will also get an attack and defense bonus if they stay within their commander's command range, so try not to let them go too far. Commanders can increase their command range, which will affect those bonuses when you promote them. This adds a layer of strategy to the game, as while Ledin is a swordsman, you can hire lancers to protect him if a map has a lot of cavalry units. The type of units available to you are based on character classes, and instead of promoting at level 10 as in the classic games, your characters earn CP when they level up, or if they are the most valuable player of the map. Each class is part of a tier, and you can change classes within tiers to get different soldiers and abilities at the expense of putting your mercenaries at risk against stronger enemies later in the game. Your units can also regenerate health each turn if you place them next to your commander, and this applies to the enemy too. The game also has another interesting approach to the commanders and mercenaries system. You can always beat an enemy by beating their commanders. If you beat a commander, any mercenaries they have under their control will be defeated too. While this is a faster way of winning, it comes at the cost of getting less experience overall. It's best to beat the mercenaries the commander controls before beating the commander to make the most of it. This of course affects you in the same way, as the enemy can destroy all of your mercenaries by destroying the commander too, though in the remake the enemy won't gain experience. The remake does give you the option to replay maps so you can get stronger and get more money to recruit mercenaries and buy equipment. However, you can only have the characters available on that map to use, and if you decided to replay an earlier chapter, you'll need to play through the chapters in between again to get back to where you were. On one hand, it does detract from the game's difficulty, as that luxury wasn't in the original games, and you had to plan a lot better, but on the other hand, it does make Langrisser I and II more accessible to newer players. I really like what they've done to the game's story, especially with the first Langrisser. The original Langrisser only really had one path and was a pretty linear game. In this remake, and for the very first time, while you don't make choices in the story, the course of the story changes based on certain conditions on the map. That can come down to things such as leaving a certain character alive until you beat the map, or ensuring a character doesn't escape. The game even introduces an original character to the story as well. It was nice to even see that they've kept the Choanarchy stage in Langrisser II, and for context, Choanarchy games were another franchise of original developers Masaya Games. As someone who has played through the original Langrisser, knowing what the end result was, it was quite pleasing to see how radically different the story played out because I'd chosen not to defeat certain characters. The game also has a story tree which can hint to you on what you need to do to unlock new paths, though you have to be quite resourceful or familiar with Langrisser II to get the Choanarchy stage, as the story tree doesn't provide you with any hints. I also didn't mind the modern music for the most part, and at times there were moments I actually preferred over the original soundtrack. As I stated earlier, I like Satoshi Urashihara's art, so I stuck with the original character designs over Ryonagi's take on them, and personally some of Ryonagi's designs are a bit bleh compared to original art. I appreciate the game on giving us the choice for character art and music, but as much as I love the game, it does have its faults, so let's look at them in the bad. The battle animations in the game are certainly something. I can't say I'm a huge fan of them, and they're probably on par with or slightly better than the super deformed huddling that was the 3DS game. Even the mobile game handles battle animations a lot better, so you'd think that for a series like Langrisser they would build on that or make it better, given that the mobile game is a gacha game of all things. The original games were acceptable in battle animations, and I think that was sort of the charm to them. Instead we have sprites that look like they came out of Fire Emblem Heroes, standing on opposite ends hitting each other. They don't even clash either, and to me, while I did eventually get used to it, it took me a very long time to do so. I also found that learning how the game works is a little confusing, given that you learn the gameplay basics and strategies from playing through Langrisser II first. As someone who likes to play games in order, this felt a little backwards to me, and for newer players, even having a rundown on the basics of the game or an optional prologue for Langrisser could have helped newer players who had decided to play through the first game first. The closest thing to advice in the first game comes in and around stage 4, when you were told that fire works best on slime monsters, and that the only characters with fire at the time are NPCs who come to help you with it. They then join you and you don't see any more slimes until much later in the game, at which point you can just beat them up normally. While replaying maps and learning through trial and error does help newer players, it's not really a huge help if you go in not knowing how the mechanics work to begin with. Thankfully you don't need to have extensive knowledge of Langrisser to play Langrisser II, but if you have played it you'll get a few of the references in the second game. Other than that, there isn't much else to complain about here, so let's give the opinion. For the most part, I really enjoyed this remake. Langrisser to me is an overlooked series in the tactical role-playing genre, often overshadowed by Fire Emblem. And for those wanting something a little different in that genre, then I would say Langrisser would definitely be a series to look at. The gameplay is the strongest aspect of it, and I really appreciate the fact that Langrisser I gets multiple endings, which explores what could have been. Langrisser II is still as fun as I remember, and it's great to see the first two games get an official release, as Warsong changed up a lot of the game to cater to the audience back in the day. The game is let down by the poor battle animations and having to learn the game through trial and error if you've played Langrisser I first. But it would be great to see Langrisser 3, 4 and 5 get official releases too, and I'm hoping that since the characters were introduced in the mobile gacha game, there would be an increased amount of interest in them. I can't comment too much on Langrisser Millennium as I don't know too much about that one. Nonetheless, it's time for me to give a rating. I would give Langrisser I and II Choanarchy out of 10. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next Infinite Backlog review. If you enjoyed today's review, feel free to check out some of our other videos and subscribe for more. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram and our Facebook page. Once again, thank you for watching.